Okay ladies, now this is regarding your task 4. Please go through the rubrics of task 4 very carefully and see that you satisfy all the points. To begin with, you have to write an abstract. It should not be more than 500 words. Clear and comprehensive coverage of all key parts of the research project has to be there in the abstract. All areas should be covered fully, which means that the task 4 must have all your findings. It must have your recommendations, whatever recommendations you have given. Write it briefly under the abstract, and the findings also has to be briefly under the abstract. So that's about the abstract, which is just a summary of what you have done in your task 4. But that apart, let's look at the other things that you need to do in this task. So the next is discussion and findings, recommendations and conclusions. Discussion of findings including a detailed analysis of the strengths and limitations of the project. So you have to mention the discussion of the findings is full and detailed. So first is the discussion, means writing the findings, whatever results you got from your regression or from your correlation, if you have done a correlation, if you have prepared an ANOVA table for those who are doing primary analysis on primary data, and if you have prepared your ANOVA table, which is a very important statistical tool in case of primary data analysis, or if you have done your regression, whatever results you have got, after writing the results, you have to do a discussion of the findings, which means you justify the results that you have got with sufficient reasoning. So you have to write the findings and then relate it to the research goals, because you must have had some research objective in the beginning. So how far your results satisfy those goals and how far they don't, how much does it match to what you had assumed in the study, how much it doesn't match, etc. Also, a detailed analysis of the strengths and limitations of the project has to be very detailed. What are the certain strengths of your project? What are certain limitations? For example, one of the limitations we can say is that the study period, which most of you have selected as say 5 years or 4 years, or some have selected even just 3 years. So that is a limitation, because the longer the period of the study, the results of that analysis are more robust, they are more strong. But if the period of study is shorter, then that is one of the limitations, because then our results are not very they are not very accurate, and they don't speak very accurately of whatever is going on in that particular area. So having a longer period of study is one of the strengths. Including more data in your study, that is the strength. So if you couldn't do that, that's a limitation. And so on and so forth. You have to find more strengths and limitations of your study, for which you must look at some of the literature review that you had done, go through some of the papers that you have downloaded for your study and see what was the limitations of those studies. For example, another limitation you can say is that most of you have done a study only in UAE. So the more samples we include in our study, and we study that particular topic across different countries, again our results are much better. So that is one limitation of a study. So this way, see that your limitations and strengths has to be very detailed. See that you include recommendations at the end of your task, which means after findings, discussion, the strengths and limitations, you must have recommendations, because every study must have some recommendation. That is what is a research all about. More than 2 detailed recommendations for the future that are clearly based on your research results. So the recommendation that you give should be based on the results that you have found. So if you have found something which is say something which has a negative correlation, or something which has a positive impact on your dependent variable, so see that the recommendations that you give are in line with the results that you have got. So recommendations need to be fully explained. And finally, you have the conclusion. Conclusion shows a full detailed summary of the finding and recommendation. So conclusion always ends with a little about what is the result that you had found, and what is that means a summary of your finding, and what is the recommendation that you have provided. So the conclusion has to be a little brief. It should not be as detailed as your findings or as your recommendations. And now look at the other details. Your formatting of the paper. See that you fulfill all the points which are written here. Go through each of them carefully. English language. So see that there are as less typos as possible. Read through your write-up to see that the English language used is correct, is appropriate. Then you should have fulfilled the APA formatting. Safe assign not more than 10%. So this is another important detail to be looked at. Once you have finished doing this, let's look at a few examples of how you will go about writing your task 4, which is the findings and the conclusion or recommendations, all inclusive. I will use the example of a research paper which I had written to give you a preview on how to write the findings. Now your findings will first start with your write-up based on the R-square if you have used a regression analysis, for those of you who have used the regression. So if your R-square has, in my example, the R-square was 72%. So if your R-square is anywhere between 35% or more than 35%, it could be 70, 80, 90, etc. Then you will write that your dependent or your independent variables explains your dependent variables up to 72% with 95% confidence level, because in the Excel your results are all at 95% confidence level. So you can say that 72% variation in the dependent variable is due to the independent variables that you have selected in your study. And then you will continue to now write the analysis for each of the variables. Say in my paper, there was one variable that was used was management efficiency. So management efficiency and capital adequacy were statistically significant at 1% and 5%. So at 1% you can write if your p-value was 0.01 or it is 0.0000. Then you can say that your these variables are statistically significant. That means they significantly impact the dependent variable, which means either ROA or net interest margin or whatever you have selected. So it means that the independent variables of management efficiency and capital adequacy impact significantly the ROA at 1% and at 5%. So 5% you will say if the p-value was 0.05 or it is 0.04 or 0.03. So you can say that, you can mention that at that percent, at 5% or at 1%, they were significant. Then you can explain what does, for example, in my paper, management efficiency was expressed as the ratio of operating expenses to total assets. So then you will write it as operating expenses to total assets has a significant negative impact on ROA and ROE. Because in my study, the ROA and the ROE both were the dependent variables. And if your p-value your p-value is in the negative or your t-value is in the negative, in that case you will write that that particular independent variable had a significant negative impact on your dependent variable. Significant, you will write the word significant only if your p-value was 0.05 or less than 0.05. If it's any value higher than 0.05, it means that that particular variable does not have a significant impact on your dependent variable. So to have a significant impact, the p-value has to be 0.05 and the t significance has to be 2 or greater than 2. And if it is a negative value, you will say it has a negative impact. If it's a positive value, you will say it has a positive impact. But the word significant you will use only if the p-value is 0.05 or any value less than 0.05. Remember, lesser the value of p than 0.05, more is that variable significant. Next is, after you write the significance or non-significance of a particular variable, you must give cite some of the studies which had got similar result as you have found. So as I have written in my paper, that this is consistent with the results of previous studies on factors determining bank performance, and then I have cited those authors and the year. To continue again, then I have written that Quast and Rose, one of the previous authors, found that those banks experiencing high profitability also experienced lower operating costs. So which means lower operating costs has a relation with high profitability of banks. Therefore, now you see here I have also just included a recommendation, which in your case you will write it under a separate heading, which is recommendation. Therefore, controlling operating expenditure remains the most important task for bank management. Why most important task? Because in my study, this variable was found to have a significant impact on profitability. So, in my recommendation, I included that it should be the most important task for bank management. Another variable, which was PPE, was found to have a significant positive impact on both ROA and ROE. Because why significant? The p-value was less than 0.05 and the value was in the positive number. Now here I have extended my analysis, writing that in this respect, Brian, say one of the authors, in 2007 in his study on the top 30 of the largest companies in the world, found that PPE rise by 137% and their median market capitalization, so I used the median value which I got from descriptive statistics, they rose by, which means increased by, more than 300%, while the return on invested capital grew only from 17 to 23%. He believed that increase in market capitalization was because of an increase in average profit brought on by more than 100% increase in PPE. So I am trying to write here that the PPE, the variable PPE, was found to be significant in some past study, and how he found it significant and what are the other things that he found and what did he finally conclude. So this is how you strengthen your findings, by giving a reference of a past author or past studies based on what you found. Their results may be consistent with your results or their results may be contradictory to your result. Whatever it is, you will mention it. Contradictory means that their result was not what you found, maybe they found the opposite. So if that is the case, you will mention it. Then another variable, with respect to capital adequacy, our result on the impact of the sub-variables shows that capital adequacy to risk-weighted assets has a positive impact on bank performance. So after I write my finding, then I write my the discussion. Berger, another author, 1995, in this context stated that contrary to what one might expect in situations of perfect capital markets with symmetric information, there is a positive relation between capital and ROE. So because we found a positive relation, therefore we are giving we are referring to another author which also found a positive relationship. And then further I have written other studies have also found similar results, but when you write that, see that you cite those at least two author minimum, not so many that I have given, but at least cite two authors with the year of the study who found your similar studies. You can also, if you want, mention at least one author or two authors that who found a result which was contradictory to your result, opposite to your result. You may do that if you like. How will you write your conclusions? Recommendations, I told you, whatever result you found, Based on that result, you will give your recommendation on whether how that should be the main priority of a bank